A City Awakens, Introduction to Roman Life. The first light of dawn touches the 7 hills of Rome, and already the city stirs, not with the gentle awakening you might imagine, but with the urgent pulse of a world that never truly sleeps. Even now, in these early hours when the air still holds the coolness of night, there's an expectation hanging over the cobblestones like morning mist, an expectation of excellence, of perfection, of being more than yesterday demanded. Listen, can you hear it? The soft shuffle of sandaled feet against stone, the distant murmur of voices already discussing the day's obligations, the gentle scrape of shutters opening to reveal windows that will soon frame another day of striving, of measuring, of the endless dance between who we are and who we think we should be. This is Rome in the time of the early emperors. A city where marble gleams white against the morning sky, where fountains sing their eternal songs, where every street corner whispers stories of ambition and achievement, but also, and perhaps more importantly, where ordinary people wake each day carrying the weight of extraordinary expectations. You see, perfection wasn't just an ideal in ancient Rome, it was currency. It was survival. It was the invisible thread that wove through every interaction, every transaction, every quiet moment when a person looked at their reflection in a bronze mirror and wondered, am I enough? The Romans had a word, virtus. We translate it as virtue, but it meant something deeper, something more demanding. It meant excellence in all things, moral excellence, physical excellence, excellence in your craft, your relationships, your devotion to the gods, your service to the empire. It meant never being allowed to simply be. In a narrow street that winds between the Palatine and Aventine hills, a potter named Marcus begins his day. His hands, weathered and strong, reach for the clay that waits on his workbench. But before he touches it, he pauses, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of knowing that today's work will be judged not just by its function, but by its beauty, its perfection. Marcus isn't wealthy. He doesn't dine with senators or own vast estates in the countryside. He doesn't command legions or write poetry that will echo through the ages. He is, by the standards of his time and ours, an ordinary man. But ordinary, in Rome, still meant extraordinary pressure. His workshop sits on a street where the sounds of the city create their daily symphony. The clip-clop of donkeys carrying amphora filled with wine and oil, the calls of vendors already hawking fresh bread and garum, that fermented fish sauce that Romans loved and we might find mysterious, the laughter of children playing games with knuckle bones in the spaces between the shops. But beneath these sounds, if you listen carefully, you can hear something else. The quiet sighs of people preparing to perform, to be the version of themselves that the day demands, to carry not just their own hopes and fears, but the expectations of family, of neighbors, of an empire that demanded excellence from every citizen, no matter how humble their station. Marcus shapes his clay, and with each turn of the wheel, each gentle pressure of his fingers, he's not just creating a vessel, he's creating proof that he belongs, proof that he's worthy, proof that he can meet the standards that seem to rise a little higher each day, like floodwaters that never quite recede. The morning light grows stronger now, streaming through the small window of his workshop and illuminating the dust motes that dance in the air like tiny spirits. On the shelf behind him sit yesterday's creations, bowls and cups and storage jars that look, to our eyes, beautifully imperfect, charmingly human. But Marcus sees only the places where his hand slipped slightly, the spots where the glaze pooled unevenly, the tiny imperfections that whisper, "Not good enough," in a voice that sounds suspiciously like his own. This is the paradox of perfection. The more we achieve, the more clearly we see what we haven't achieved. The higher we climb, the more aware we become of how far we still have to go. Marcus has been working clay for 20 years. His vessels are sought after in the markets. Families across Rome eat from bowls shaped by his hands. And yet, each morning brings the same quiet fear that today might be the day his skill abandons him. Outside his window, the city continues its awakening. A woman hurries past, her stola, that long, draped dress, flowing behind her as she balances a basket of fruit on her hip. She's probably heading to the market, where she'll smile at the vendors and haggle with the practiced ease of someone who's done this 1,000 times. But you can see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she holds her head, the invisible armor of competence that Roman women wore like jewelry, because they too lived under the weight of virtues. They too were expected to embody perfection in their roles as wives, mothers, managers of households that were small economies unto themselves. They were expected to be beautiful, but not vain, intelligent, but not threatening, strong, but not unfeminine. They carried their own impossible standards, their own quiet fears of falling short. A group of young men passes beneath Marcus's window, their togas pristine white in the morning sun. They're probably heading to the forum where they'll practice rhetoric and debate politics and law, where they'll perform the careful dance of ambition that might, if they're skilled enough, lucky enough, perfect enough, lead them to positions of influence and power. But listen to their laughter. Do you hear how it carries just a note of strain? How even their casual conversation seems rehearsed, as if they're always auditioning for roles they're not sure they want. This is the sound of people who learned early that being yourself isn't enough, that you must always be becoming someone better, someone more worthy, someone closer to an ideal that seems to shift like shadows at sunset. The potter's wheel turns, and Marcus's hands move with the confidence of decades of practice. But his mind is elsewhere, on the commission he received yesterday from a wealthy merchant. On the dinner party where his wife will serve wine in cups he's made, and how the guests will examine them with the casual expertise of people who know quality when they see it. On his son, who shows no interest in clay but dreams of joining the legions, of finding his own path to virtues through service to Rome. This is what perfection costs, not just the effort to achieve it, but the constant vigilance to maintain it. The exhausting work of being always on, always performing, always measuring yourself against standards that feel both essential and impossible. And yet, there's something else in Marcus's workshop this morning, something that exists in the spaces between the striving, in the moment when his hands find their rhythm on the clay, in the satisfaction of a form that emerges exactly as he envisioned it, in the quiet pride he feels but rarely allows himself to acknowledge. Because here's what the Romans understood, even as they struggled under the weight of their own expectations. Excellence isn't just about the final product. It's about the daily practice, the showing up, the willingness to begin again each morning, even when yesterday felt like failure, even when the gap between aspiration and achievement seems unbridgeable. The sun climbs higher now, and the sounds of the city grow richer, more complex. Rome is fully awake, and with it, millions of people beginning another day of carrying the beautiful, terrible burden of trying to be worthy, of trying to be enough, of trying to be perfect in a world that seems designed to remind them of all the ways they fall short. But they begin anyway. They shape their clay and tend their shops and raise their children and love their spouses and serve their gods and their empire with a dedication that speaks to something deeper than mere duty, something that recognizes that the attempt itself, the daily choice to try again, might be its own form of perfection. The wheel turns. The clay yields to gentle pressure. And in a workshop in ancient Rome, an ordinary man creates something beautiful from earth and water, and the endless, complicated hope that tomorrow might be the day he finally gets it right. Gardens and marketplaces. A day begins. The sun climbs higher over the 7 hills, and the city awakens fully now. Not just the artisans in their workshops, but the entire sprawling network of lives that make Rome. Rome. In the gardens behind the grand houses on the Palatine Hill, slaves move between rows of carefully tended herbs and vegetables. Their hands are already dirty from the morning's work, pulling weeds from around the mint and basil, checking the olive trees for signs of disease. The gardens are beautiful, almost impossibly so. Every plant in its proper place, every path swept clean of fallen leaves. But even here, in these pockets of green tranquility, there's an undercurrent of urgency. The head gardener walks the rows with a critical eye, noting which slaves work quickly and which lag behind. There will be an accounting later. There always is. The master of the house expects perfection in his gardens, just as he expects it everywhere else. The roses must bloom exactly when they should. The vegetables must be abundant and flawless. Even nature, it seems, must bend to Roman standards of excellence. A young slave girl named Livia kneels beside a patch of struggling lettuce, her fingers working carefully around each plant. She's been in this household for 3 years now, and she's learned that attention to detail can mean the difference between praise and punishment. Each leaf matters. Each root system must be preserved. The other slaves whisper that she's too careful, too slow. But Livia has seen what happens to those who rush. Their mistakes are noticed, their failures remembered. She pauses for a moment, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. The morning sun is already warm, promising another scorching day. In the distance, she can hear the sounds of the city awakening. The rumble of cartwheels on stone, the calls of vendors setting up their stalls, the general hum of thousands of people beginning their daily routines. Down in the valleys between the hills, those sounds grow louder and more distinct. The markets of Rome are coming alive, and with them, a different kind of pressure. The relentless demand of commerce, of survival, of making enough denarii to feed a family for another day. Marcus Flavius arranges pottery on his wooden stall with the same careful attention that Livia gives to her lettuce. Each piece must catch the light just so. The larger amphorae go in the back, their painted surfaces gleaming. The smaller bowls and cups cascade forward in neat rows, their glazes reflecting the morning sun like tiny mirrors. Marcus has been a potter for 15 years and a vendor in this market for 10. He knows exactly how to display his wares to catch a customer's eye. But knowing and succeeding are different things entirely. Competition is fierce. 3 other pottery vendors work this same stretch of the market, and all of them are skilled craftsmen. All of them have families to feed. He adjusts a wine cup for the 3rd time, turning it slightly so a small imperfection in the glaze faces away from the main walkway. It's a beautiful piece, really. Functional and elegant with a deep red finish that took him 2 attempts to perfect. But that tiny flaw, barely visible unless you know where to look, makes it less than ideal. In Rome, less than ideal often means unsold. Beautiful work as always, Marcus. The voice belongs to Gaius, who sells leather goods from the stall next to his. They've been neighbors in this market for years, and there's a comfortable camaraderie between them, the kind that develops between people who understand each other's struggles without needing to discuss them. "Thank you," Marcus replies, though his eyes remain focused on his display. "Though I'm not sure beautiful is enough anymore. Did you see what young Quintus brought yesterday? His glaze work is—" He pauses, searching for the right word. "Exceptional." Gaius nods knowingly. Quintus is barely 20, trained by a master craftsman in the Greek style, and his pottery has a refinement that makes everyone else's work look slightly ordinary. The customers notice. Gaius agrees quietly. They do notice. Marcus has seen it in their faces. The way their eyes light up when they reach Quintus's stall, the way they handle his pieces with extra care, as if touching something precious. It's not that Marcus's work is poor. It's simply that in a city obsessed with excellence, being merely good feels like failing. A few stalls down, another kind of performance is beginning. Claudia, a fishmonger's wife, arranges the morning's catch on beds of ice, her movements quick and efficient. The fish must look fresh, appetizing, worthy of a Roman table. She discards anything that doesn't meet her standards. A fish with clouded eyes, another with scales that have lost their luster. Claudia has been doing this work since she was barely older than a child, learning first from her mother, then from her husband's family when she married. She can judge the quality of fish with a glance, can spot the difference between something caught yesterday and something caught this morning. It's a skill that took years to develop, and one that the customers depend on, even if they rarely acknowledge it. But skill alone isn't enough. In the competitive world of the Roman marketplace, presentation matters just as much as quality. Claudia arranges her fish not just for freshness, but for beauty. The silver sides of the mackerel catching the light, the red snappers positioned to show their best angles, everything laid out with the precision of an artist arranging a still life. A well-dressed matron approaches, her slave trailing behind with a wicker basket. Claudia straightens, putting on the smile she's perfected over years of dealing with customers who expect not just good fish, but good service, good humor, good everything. "What's freshest today?" the matron asks, though her tone suggests she already doubts the answer. "Everything you see was brought in before dawn," Claudia replies smoothly. "The mackerel are particularly beautiful, caught just outside Ostia yesterday evening." The matron examines the fish with a critical eye, looking for any sign of deterioration, any hint that she's being deceived. This is the dance of the Roman marketplace. Customer and vendor circling each other warily, each trying to get the best of the bargain, each carrying their own fears of being taken advantage of. Claudia waits patiently while the woman deliberates. She's learned not to rush these moments, not to show any sign of desperation, even when the morning's sales have been slow, even when she's calculating how much they need to earn today just to break even. The appearance of confidence, of success, is almost as important as actual success. Finally, the matron nods and points to 3 of the mackerel. "Those ones. And make sure your scales are honest." The comment stings, though Claudia keeps her expression neutral. She's been selling fish in this market for over a decade, has built a reputation for fair dealing, but still, the assumption lingers that vendors are inherently dishonest, that customers must be constantly vigilant against deception. She weighs the fish carefully, adding a small extra piece to ensure the scales tip slightly in the customer's favor. It's a gesture she's learned to make automatically, a small sacrifice of profit in service of reputation. In Rome, your reputation is everything, and once lost, nearly impossible to recover. The sun continues its climb, and the market grows busier. More customers emerge from their morning routines, slaves sent by their masters with lists of required purchases, housewives calculating how to stretch their household budgets, merchants from other parts of the city looking for goods to resell. And with each interaction, each transaction, each careful negotiation, the same underlying tension persists. The pressure to be perfect, to exceed expectations, to prove worthiness in a world that seems designed to find fault. The potter arranges his wares one more time. The fishmonger's wife checks her scales again. The gardener's slave tends her vegetables with infinite care. All of them carrying the weight of Roman expectations, the exhausting demand to be excellent, always, in everything. Crafting perfection, art and labor. The weight settles differently when you work with your hands. In the sculptor's studio, 3 blocks from the Forum, Gaius Aurelius feels it in his shoulders as he raises the bronze chisel to marble. The stone is Carrara white, flawless, which means his work must be flawless too. He has been carving since before dawn. The commission is for Senator Quintus Flavius, a portrait bust that must capture not just likeness, but dignity, gravitas, the very essence of Roman nobility. The senator's wife specified that her husband's jaw should appear more defined, his nose more aquiline, his expression more commanding. "Make him look like Caesar," she had said, as if greatness could be carved into stone. The chisel moves with practiced precision, each strike deliberate, each curve considered. Gaius has spent 20 years learning to read marble, to feel where the stone wants to break, where it will resist. But the stone's preferences matter less than Roman expectations. In the corner of the workshop, his apprentice Marcus, not the potter, but another Marcus, for the name is common, grinds pigments for the final painting. Even marble must be enhanced. Flesh tones for the skin, gold leaf for the hair, blue for the eyes that will make the senator appear more divine than mortal. The boy's hands are stained permanent red from cinnabar, blue from lapis lazuli, ground so fine it floats like dust in the morning light. These colors cost more than most Romans earn in a year. The pressure to use them perfectly, to waste nothing, sits heavy in the workshop air. "The cheekbone," Gaius murmurs, more to himself than to Marcus. Too pronounced. The wife will say it makes him look gaunt. He has learned to anticipate criticism before it comes, to see flaws that exist only in the gap between reality and Roman ideals of perfection. The senator's actual cheekbone is sharp, angular, but marble must improve upon nature, not merely copy it. The chisel whispers against stone, each tap echoing in the high-ceilinged space. The rhythm is meditative. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. Like a heartbeat made audible. But underneath the rhythm lives anxiety, the knowledge that one wrong strike could shatter weeks of work. Across the city, in a workshop that smells of wool and lanolin, another kind of perfection takes shape on the loom. Claudia. Different from the fishmonger's wife, for this name too is common. Works the threads with fingers that have never known softness. The loom stands taller than she does. Warp threads stretch from floor to ceiling, taut as harp strings, each thread precisely spaced, each color carefully planned. The pattern she weaves will become a toga for the same Senator Quintus Flavius, the man whose face Gaius carves in marble across the city. The senator's wife chose the design herself. Purple stripes to indicate rank, gold thread to catch the light during public appearances. The weaving must be so fine that each thread appears painted rather than woven, so perfect that it seems effortless. But effort fills every moment. Claudia's shuttle moves back and forth, carrying the weft thread through the warp in a rhythm older than Rome itself. Her grandmother taught her this pattern, her grandmother's grandmother before that. The knowledge passes from woman to woman, like a sacred trust. The purple dye came from murex shells, thousands of them, harvested from distant shores and processed into liquid worth more than gold. 3 drops of this dye cost what Claudia earns in a month. She cannot afford to make mistakes. Her daughter Julia sits beside the loom, learning to card wool. The girl's hands are small, clumsy still. But they will learn. They must learn. In Rome, women's work is invisible until it fails to meet expectations. Then it becomes the subject of sharp words and sharper consequences. "Feel the thread," Claudia whispers to Julia. "Let it tell you when it wants to break." But Roman thread must not break. Roman cloth must not fade. Roman workmanship must exceed the standards of Athens, of Alexandria, of every civilization that came before. The weight of empire sits in every fiber. The shuttle continues its journey, back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm matches the sculptor's chisel. Tap, tap, pause. creating a citywide heartbeat of human effort, of hands shaping matter into forms that will outlast the bodies that create them. In the sculptor's workshop, Gaius steps back to examine his progress. The senator's face emerges from marble like a figure surfacing from deep water. The features are noble, commanding, more perfect than the man himself. But perfection in Rome is not about truth. It is about aspiration. He thinks of the other commissions waiting, a relief panel for a new temple, a fountain figure for a wealthy merchant's garden, each project carrying the same weight, the same demand for excellence that exceeds human capability. His hands ache. 20 years of gripping tools, of fighting stone, of translating vision into reality. The ache is familiar now, as much a part of him as his own heartbeat, but it is the price of Roman craftsmanship, the cost of creating beauty in a world that accepts nothing less than perfection. Marcus, the apprentice, looks up from his pigments. Master, the senator's wife, she sent another message. Gaius feels his stomach tighten. What does she want change now? The expression. She says he should look more philosophical, like Marcus Aurelius. The irony is not lost on Gaius. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote of accepting imperfection, of finding peace with human limitation. But his marble portraits show none of that acceptance. They show only the face Rome expects its emperors to wear. Gaius picks up his chisel again. The stone will yield. It always does. But each change requested, each revision demanded, carries him further from the man he is carving and closer to the myth Rome requires. At the loom, Claudia's shuttle maintains its rhythm. Back and forth, the purple stripe grows thread by thread, each pass adding depth to the color that will mark the senator's rank. The gold catches afternoon light streaming through the workshop's single window. Julia has fallen asleep beside the wool basket. Her small hands still clutch the carding combs. Even in sleep, she practices the motions her mother taught her, the gestures that will define her life as they have defined every woman in her family. The loom's rhythm is hypnotic, soothing, like rain on roof tiles or waves against harbor stones. But underneath the comfort lies the constant awareness. One broken thread, one misaligned stripe, one imperfection in the weave could mean starting over, could mean waste that her family cannot afford. Claudia's mother brought her to this workshop when she was Julia's age, taught her to read the tension in threads, to feel when the wool wanted to snap, but mostly taught her to carry the weight of Roman expectations, to understand that women's work, though invisible, must be flawless. The shuttle continues, back and forth, weaving together not just threads, but the fabric of an empire that demands perfection from every hand that serves it. The senator will wear this toga knowing nothing of Claudia's name, will see his portrait knowing nothing of Gaius's aching hands, but their perfection will reflect his worthiness. Their skill will confirm his status, and they will begin again tomorrow. New commissions, new demands, new opportunities to prove themselves worthy of Roman expectations, or to fail beneath their weight. The chisel taps, the shuttle passes, the rhythm of perfection continues. The weight of expectations, social standing, but perfection was not only measured in the work of hands. In Rome, it lived most powerfully in the careful choreography of social standing, in the delicate dance of who knew you, and how the world saw your place among them. The morning sun climbs higher now, casting longer shadows across the Forum Romanum. Here, beneath marble columns that gleam like polished bone, the true currency of Roman life changes hands, not denarii or sestertii, but reputation, recognition, the invisible gold of social worth. Watch Eumacia as she moves through the sacred precinct of the Temple of Vesta. Her stola, dyed the deep saffron reserved for priestesses, whispers against marble steps worn smooth by centuries of reverent feet. As a public priestess, she carries more than religious duties. She carries the weight of being seen as worthy, always worthy. Her morning ritual begins before dawn. Not only the sacred preparations, but the careful attention to how she will appear to the citizens who will watch her, every gesture, the placement of each fold in her garment, the precise angle of her head during prayer, the measured cadence of her voice as she speaks the ancient words. Because in Rome, to serve the gods publicly means to embody perfection publicly. Every stumble becomes gossip, every imperfection becomes doubt. Not only in her, but in the divine order she represents. She arranges the sacred fire with hands that must never tremble, speaks the ritual words with a voice that must never falter, maintains the serene expression that must never crack. Even when her feet ache from standing, even when worry about her aging mother gnaws at her thoughts, even when the younger priestesses watch her with eyes that seem to catalog every sign of weakness, the fire flickers, perfect and eternal, as she must appear to be. But perhaps nowhere is this hunger for social elevation more desperate than in the quarters where freedmen make their homes. Here, in the narrow streets that climb the Aventine Hill, former slaves navigate the treacherous waters of Roman society with the intensity of those who know how quickly status can be lost. Marcus Antonius Felix. No relation to the great families who share those names, though he chose them carefully when he earned his freedom. This morning finds him in his modest workshop, but his attention is not on the leather goods that provide his living. Instead, he hunches over a wax tablet practicing his letters. The stylus moves slowly across the wax surface, each character formed with the deliberate care of someone who learned to read not as a child, but as a man desperate to rise. Because in Rome, literacy is not merely practical, it is proof of worthiness, evidence that you belong among the civilized, not the barbarian masses. His fingers, still bearing the calluses of his years in bondage, struggle to form the elegant curves that come naturally to those born free. But he persists, hour after hour, morning after morning, because he has seen how other freedmen have climbed. Not through wealth alone, but through the careful cultivation of intellectual respectability. He practices writing his name with the flourishes he has observed in the forum, studies the way senators hold themselves when they speak, memorizes phrases from Virgil and Cicero that he can drop into conversation to prove his cultural worth. The irony cuts deep, that freedom means not the absence of performance, but the need to perform even more convincingly. As a slave, his worth was measured in labor. As a freedman, it must be measured in his ability to seem as though he was never anything else. His wife, Claudia, not the weaver we met earlier, but another woman carrying the weight of Roman expectations, brings him bread and watered wine. She, too, carries the particular burden of the freedwoman. Her clothing must suggest prosperity without ostentation. Her manner must demonstrate refinement without appearing to reach beyond her station. She has learned to speak softly but clearly, to lower her eyes at precisely the right moments, to laugh at the correct volume when the wives of free-born citizens make their subtle jokes about new money and recent elevation. She endures their condescension because the alternative, sliding back into invisibility, into the masses of the forgotten, is unthinkable. Their daughter plays at her feet, born free but carrying the invisible mark of her parents' past. They watch her with fierce attention, correcting her posture, her pronunciation, her mannerisms, not from cruelty, but from love, from the desperate hope that she might move through the world without the constant weight of proving herself worthy of the air she breathes. The morning light shifts, illuminating a scroll that lies partially unrolled on Marcus's table. It contains not accounts or business correspondence, but poetry, his own attempts at verse. Because he has learned that in Rome, true acceptance requires not just literacy, but literary achievement. He writes of noble themes, honor, duty, the glory of the empire. Not the reality he knows, the exhaustion of constantly performing worthiness, the fear that keeps him awake at night, the way his stomach clenches when he must speak before those born to the status he has fought to achieve. His poems speak of marble halls, not wooden workshops, of philosophical contemplation, not the grinding anxiety of social climbing. They are beautiful lies, the kind Rome demands from those who would be accepted into its embrace. But even as he writes these careful verses, Marcus knows the cruel mathematics of Roman society, that no matter how perfectly he performs respectability, how flawlessly he mimics the mannerisms of the freeborn, how eloquently he speaks of virtue and honor, there will always be those who see only what he was, not what he has become. The stylus pauses in his hand. For a moment the mask slips, and we see the exhaustion beneath, the weight of carrying not only his own hopes, but those of his wife, his daughter, all the freedmen who watch to see if elevation is truly possible or merely an elaborate illusion. Yet he returns to his writing, because the alternative, accepting the limitations others would place on him, is a kind of death. Better to exhaust himself reaching for recognition that may never fully come than to surrender to the invisibility that would surely follow surrender. The morning sun reaches its height now, casting sharp shadows that divide the city into patches of brilliant light and deep darkness, like Roman society itself, where the illuminated spaces of acceptance are small and precious, and the shadows of exclusion stretch long and dark. In her temple, Eumacia tends the sacred flame that must never die. In his workshop, Marcus forms letters that spell his hopes for acceptance. Both understand that in Rome, perfection is not a destination, but a journey without end, a daily performance that demands everything and promises nothing. The fire burns, the stylus moves, the careful choreography of social aspiration continues, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries more. And somewhere in the space between reaching and grasping, between hoping and achieving, the human heart learns to carry the weight of expectations, both those placed upon it and those it places upon itself. Moments of respite, finding peace. But even in a world that demanded such relentless perfection, there were moments, small pockets of time when the performance could pause, when the weight could be set down, if only briefly. The Romans understood something profound about human nature, that the spirit, like the body, required restoration. They built this understanding into their very architecture, their daily rhythms, their sacred spaces. In the heart of the city, steam rises from the caldarium of the baths of Caracalla. The massive vaulted ceiling seems to hold the sky itself, decorated with stars picked out in gold mosaic against deep blue stone. Here, senators sit beside merchants, their togas folded carefully on marble benches, their bodies equally vulnerable in the warm, embracing water. Marcus arrives as the afternoon light slants through the high windows. His hands, still bearing traces of clay beneath the nails, slip into the heated pool. The water receives him without judgment, without demanding excellence or virtue or any performance at all. Around him, conversations flow in gentle murmurs. A baker speaks quietly of his daughter's upcoming wedding. An elderly scribe shares news from Alexandria. A young soldier, home on leave, simply closes his eyes and lets the warmth seep into muscles that have carried armor across half the empire. The mosaic beneath the water depicts dolphins playing among waves, creatures of pure joy, moving through their element with effortless grace. Marcus traces their forms with his toe, remembering what it feels like to move without purpose, to exist without striving. The attendants move like dancers through the steam, carrying oils scented with lavender and rosemary. Their touch is practiced, gentle. Hands that know how to coax tension from shoulders that have carried too much, from backs bent too long over work that never quite satisfies. In this space, time moves differently. The urgent demands of the forum seem distant. The pressure to excel, to prove worthiness, to climb the endless ladder of social acceptance, all of it dissolves in the mineral-rich water that has been flowing here for generations. Beyond the city walls, in a villa overlooking the Alban Hills, another kind of restoration unfolds. The courtyard garden catches the golden light of late afternoon, its carefully tended paths winding between rose bushes and olive trees. Livia walks here now, her gardening duties complete for the day. The flowers she tends professionally in the morning become, in this quiet hour, simply beautiful things to behold. The jasmine releases its evening perfume. The fountain whispers its ancient song against marble worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. She settles on a stone bench beneath a pergola heavy with grapevines. Above her, the leaves filter sunlight into patterns of green and gold that shift and dance with each small breeze. Her hands, usually busy with pruning and planting, rest quietly in her lap. A cat appears from behind the fountain, padding silently across the warm stones. It settles in a patch of sunlight, begins the serious work of grooming, utterly absorbed in its own simple existence. Livia watches, envying the creature's complete presence in the moment, its freedom from the human burden of constant self-improvement. The villa's owner, a wealthy matron named Octavia, emerges from the house carrying a scroll. But instead of reading, she sets it aside and simply breathes in the garden's peace. Here, in her private sanctuary, she is not a patron to be impressed or a social connection to be cultivated. She is simply a woman who has created beauty and now allows herself to rest within it. They sit in comfortable silence, mistress and servant, both women who understand the weight of daily performance, both grateful for this space where such performances are not required. The shadows lengthen. A nightingale begins its evening song from the olive grove beyond the garden walls. The sound is pure, unself-conscious. Music made not for applause or approval, but simply because that is what nightingales do when the day grows soft and the air fills with the scent of growing things. In temples throughout the city, another kind of rest is found, not the rest of the body, but the rest of the spirit. The ancient human need to connect with something larger than the daily struggle for advancement and recognition. In the temple of Vesta, the sacred flame burns eternal and steady. Priestesses move in quiet ritual, their faces serene in the flickering light. Here, service has a different quality. Not the anxious service of those seeking favor, but the peaceful service of those who have found their place in an order larger than themselves. Claudia comes here sometimes, leaving offerings of bread baked in her own oven. She kneels before the altar not to petition for success or status, but simply to acknowledge the mystery that allows grain to become flour, flour to become bread, bread to become sustenance for the body and soul. The marble floors are worn smooth by countless knees, countless prayers, countless moments of surrender. The very stones seem to hold the peace of all who have found rest here, who have discovered that there is something profoundly restoring about admitting one's smallness in the face of the eternal. Outside the temple, the city continues its relentless pace. Merchants close their stalls, senators hurry to evening appointments, slaves carry torches through darkening streets. The great machine of empire grinds on, demanding its daily tribute of human effort and ambition. But in these sacred spaces, in the warm embrace of the baths, in the quiet beauty of gardens, in the humble acknowledgement of mystery, something else is possible. Rest. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of recognition. The recognition that human worth is not earned through endless striving, that there is a place in the universe for simple being, for quiet gratitude, for the radical act of setting down the burden of self-improvement and allowing oneself to simply exist. The Romans, for all their obsession with virtue and excellence, understood this paradox. They built rest into their very civilization, created spaces where the performance could pause, where the mask could be set aside, where the tired human heart could remember what it feels like to be enough, exactly as it is. In the growing dusk, these spaces fill with a different kind of light. Not the harsh illumination that reveals every flaw, every failing, every way in which we fall short of impossible standards, but the gentle glow that accepts, that embraces, that whispers the ancient truth that has sustained the human spirit through every age of striving. You are already whole. You have always been enough. The rest is just performance. And sometimes, in the space between one breath and the next, between one day and the next, between one worry and the next, we remember. Reflections and rest, a night in Rome. And sometimes, in the space between one breath and the next, between one day and the next, between one worry and the next, we remember. The Roman sun has completed its arc across the 7 hills, painting the forum in shades of amber and rose. The last merchants are rolling up their awnings, their voices echoing off marble columns as they call out final bargains to passers-by. Children chase each other through the lengthening shadows, their laughter mixing with the distant sound of water flowing through the great aqueducts that have sustained this city for centuries. In her garden, Livia sets down her pruning shears and walks slowly among the olive trees she has tended with such careful devotion. Her hands, stained green from the day's work, trace the rough bark of a tree that has weathered countless seasons. She no longer thinks about whether each branch is perfectly positioned, whether each leaf meets some impossible standard of beauty. The tree simply grows, as it has always grown, as it will continue to grow long after she is gone. The weight of perfection that pressed so heavily upon her shoulders this morning has dissolved like morning mist. In its place, there is only the quiet satisfaction of work completed, of care given, of another day lived with intention and grace. Marcus the potter sits outside his workshop, his wheel finally still after hours of spinning clay into vessels that will hold wine and oil and grain for families throughout the city. His hands rest in his lap, clay still embedded beneath his fingernails, and he watches the first stars appear in the deepening sky. The amphora he struggled with this morning, the one that seemed to resist every touch, every attempt at shaping, now sits drying in the evening air, its form not quite what he had envisioned, but beautiful in its own quiet way. He thinks of the senator who commissioned it, of the pressure to create something worthy of such an important patron. But here, in the gentle transition from day to night, that pressure seems as distant as the mountains that ring the city. The clay has become what it was meant to become. His hands have done what they know how to do. The rest, the judgment, the comparison, the endless measuring against impossible standards, belongs to tomorrow, or perhaps to never. Claudia draws water from the well in her courtyard, the rope rough against her palms as she pulls the bucket up from the cool depths below. The fish market is closed now, its marble slabs washed clean, ready for tomorrow's catch. But tomorrow feels very far away. There is only this moment. The weight of the full bucket, the sound of water lapping against stone, the way the last light catches the surface and throws dancing patterns against the wall. She pours the water into a basin and washes her hands slowly, deliberately, letting the coolness soothe skin that has worked hard today. The scent of fish and salt water rinses away, leaving only the clean smell of evening air and the jasmine that climbs the walls of her home. Through her window, she can see other women in other courtyards, completing their own evening rituals, drawing water, lighting oil lamps, calling children in from their play, each of them carrying their own burdens, their own dreams, their own quiet victories that will never be recorded in marble or bronze, but matter just as much as any triumph celebrated in the Forum. The sculptor has covered his work for the night, draping soft cloth over the senator's emerging features. In the darkness of his workshop, the marble face waits patiently for tomorrow's chisel, but there is no urgency in this waiting. Stone has learned patience over millennia. It knows that true beauty cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, can only be revealed with the slow, steady rhythm of skilled hands working in harmony with the material they shape. He walks home through streets that grow quieter with each step, past temples where oil lamps flicker before statues of gods who have witnessed the rise and fall of countless human ambitions. The pressure to capture not just the senator's likeness, but his essence, his power, his place in the eternal story of Rome. This pressure has not disappeared, but it has transformed into something more manageable, a challenge rather than a burden, a conversation between artist and stone rather than a battle to be won or lost. Eumakia removes the elaborate pins from her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders as she sits before her bronze mirror. The face that looked back at her this morning, painted and arranged to embody divine perfection, now shows the gentle fatigue of a day spent serving others. But there is peace in this tired face, a kind of beauty that needs no enhancement, no performance, no careful construction. She thinks of the women who came to the temple today, seeking blessings for their children, their marriages, their small but precious hopes, each one looking to her as if she held some special connection to the divine, some power to intercede on their behalf. But sitting here in the quiet of her private chambers, she knows the truth that perhaps they all know, deep in their hearts. The divine is not something that must be earned through perfect performance. It is not a prize awarded to those who never stumble, never doubt, never show the beautiful imperfection of being human. The divine is the breath that fills their lungs without effort, the love that moves between mother and child without condition, the way morning always follows night, season follows season, in rhythms too vast and generous for human understanding. Marcus the freedman sets aside his scrolls and stylus, his day of careful writing and calculation finally complete. The letters he formed today, each one crafted to demonstrate his education, his worthiness, his transformation from slave to citizen. They rest now in neat rows across papyrus, waiting to be delivered tomorrow. But the anxious energy that drove him to perfect each curve and line has settled into something quieter. He steps onto a small balcony and looks out over the city that has become his home. Somewhere in those winding streets is the household where he once served, where his worth was measured only in his ability to anticipate his master's needs. But that life feels like something from a dream now, distant and strange. This life, this freedom to choose his words, his work, his path through each day, this is real in ways that still surprise him. The bathhouse, where he soaked away the day's tensions, is closing now, its attendants draining the pools and banking the fires that heat the water. But the memory of that warmth remains in his muscles, the way the heated water seemed to dissolve not just physical fatigue, but the constant vigilance that freedom requires. For those precious hours, he had nothing to prove, nowhere to climb, no identity to construct or defend. He was simply a body among other bodies, all of them equal in their need for rest, for warmth, for the simple pleasure of being clean. Across the city, in houses grand and humble, oil lamps are being lit against the gathering darkness. Families gather around low tables for their evening meal, sharing bread and wine and the small stories that make up a life. Children lean against their parents' shoulders, heavy with the good tiredness that comes from a day spent in play and discovery. Slaves and masters alike prepare for sleep, for in dreams all hierarchies dissolve, all performance ends, all souls wander equally through landscapes that belong to no one and everyone. The great aqueducts continue their ancient work, carrying fresh water from distant mountains to every corner of the city. The flow is constant, unhurried, as reliable as sunrise. No one questions whether the water is perfect enough, whether it meets some impossible standard of purity or pressure. It simply flows, as it has flowed for generations, as it will flow for generations yet to come, sustaining life with a generosity that asks nothing in return. In the temples, the eternal flames burn steadily before statues of gods whose marble faces have witnessed countless human dramas of ambition and disappointment, striving and surrender. These flames have burned through wars and peace, through seasons of plenty and seasons of want, through the rise of emperors and the fall of dynasties. They burn not because they are perfect, but because they are tended by human hands that understand the sacred work of keeping light alive in darkness. The stars emerge one by one over the 7 hills, the same stars that have guided travelers and dreamers since the world began. They shine without effort, without comparison, without any need to prove their worth or earn their place in the vast tapestry of night. Each one burns with its own light, its own rhythm, its own purpose in the cosmic dance that encompasses all things. And in this gentle darkness, as Rome settles into sleep, there's a whisper that moves through every street and courtyard, every workshop and temple, every heart that has struggled today with the weight of impossible expectations. The whisper that says what the stars have always known, what the flowing water remembers, what every mother's lullaby carries in its melody. You are enough. You have always been enough. You were born enough. And all the striving in the world cannot add to or subtract from this fundamental truth of your being. The city dreams now, 2 million souls surrendering to rest, to the ancient wisdom that comes only in the space between waking and sleeping, where all the day's performances fall away, and what remains is simply the breath moving in and out, the heart beating its steady rhythm, the quiet miracle of being alive in this moment, in this place under these eternal stars that shine their blessing on the worthy and unworthy alike, which is to say, on all of us always, without condition, without end.